And how do you pronounce your last name?
It's Moraya Seeger Degeare.
Degeare. Okay.
Hmm.
I wasn't
Yeah.
sure if it was more like, is it Haitian? Is it like, or French? What's the
It was originally French, and then the spelling got changed, as many people, as they're migrating, the
Yeah,
spelling changes.
because being from Brooklyn, I feel like I recognize it looks almost like a little bit Haitian, but okay.
Well, each equally, right? French
Yeah,
back there.
yeah.
So yeah, makes sense.
So we are live actually. This is I'm Ariel Serber, which you can see and hopefully you know. I'm here with Moraya Seeger Degeare. Is that well
We're
enough?
rocking it.
Just Moraya. Hey Moraya. So we're going to talk about how your brain works with money or doesn't work with money, and that's kind
Yeah.
of the topic of it's been on a lot of people's minds, literally, figuratively, forever,
Yep.
and it obviously connects to our lives, our stress levels, our health, and our wealth. So, Mariah, why don't you introduce yourself and give a little background, professional background, and then we'll get into what you're working on. And
Love
thanks for
it.
joining.
Thanks for having me on. I've caught some of your lives already. You've had some awesome people on, and some that I know, which has been great. So I'm stoked. But yes, I'm Moraya Seeger Degeare. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm the chief clinical strategist and co-founder of Calibrate. And we will get into all of the things we're researching and building at Calibrate. But I've spent over a decade in private practice working with a lot of really high achieving couples, and I'm certified in emotionally focused therapy. So I do a lot of that really deep intimacy and attachment work with couples. And I'm licensed in Minnesota and New York, and I live and I'm licensed also in North Carolina. But I've lived all of those places, and I'm from New York, the Hudson Valley.
Yeah, upstate. So I was going to say that's
Me.
an interesting collection of states to have lived in, and
Yeah.
there's probably within that a story and within the story, like the those Russian dolls. But
Sure. It's not that complicated. My husband was
no,
drafted by the Minnesota Vikings, and I was like, where, as a New Yorker, I'm like,
what?
where's the Minnesota flyover state? And I now take offense to that. I lived in Minnesota, and we have an amazing Evolve Therapy. We have amazing practice in Minnesota.
That's
So
amazing.
I lived there for 8 years, which was amazing. And then we moved back to New York. But yes, it's a quick story. I've lived other places, but it's an easy
Yeah.
one.
Okay, well that's cool. And
Yeah.
I'm sure the life of the athlete and the spouse of the athlete, that's a whole other topic that could probably
It's
speak to as
just
well.
as a part of the story of, we'll get into like the founder story, but really the story of what we're building and why we're building it, talking about these huge transitions when wealth is transitioning and how that hits families. I come from
Yeah.
also a pretty huge family anyway, in terms of like
Okay.
complexity. And so, yeah, it's a part of the story. Absolutely. It's
Right.
versus a
Because
different
it's
one.
not
It
just
all weighs
it's not
together.
just the money, it's the family, it's the relationships, it's everything going on and history
Yeah,
and what brings everyone to the point of having to make decisions that
exactly.
then gets very complicated and sometimes it's also when it comes to financial decision making because things are obviously very important but not super urgent and
Mhm.
then to make a decision means saying it means sort of committing to a path of what your actual priorities are
Yeah.
and saying no to some things and yes to other things and sometimes that's people, right? So that could be
Yep.
uh, hard to do, to say the least. So maybe if you want to speak a little bit about that, and then get into how and why you started this startup.
Yeah. I mean, decision making, it's so interesting in like the finance world, and please push back in this, is I feel like most of the time you're looking at it through an individual. All of our finance things are connected, literally in most of the tech systems back to your social security number. And you're also making an assumption that they're capable of making a decision, they're ready to make a change because what other assumptions do we have to work with when we're just looking at someone through their numbers? And so in this is like, if we're really just approaching any of these meetings or any of these decisions and you're saying, okay, like, so what's your net worth? Or, let's have the conversation about cash flow. What do I have to work with? I have my gut instinct and my understanding, of the person and any information that I can sort of glean out there. And then I have these numbers, and for many advisors, that's sitting in a bunch of different systems already. And they're, some of them I think are doing an incredible job of like working and understanding, working with people with just looking at a bunch of numbers. And so what we're doing is saying the other side of it matters and we're bringing the worlds together. So my co-founder, Nick, is formerly at Wharton and in responsible investing at PNC. And so he's really approaching it from looking at these values around numbers and people. And I'm approaching the work and the conversation in our research, looking at the relational and the attachment. And I say all of that is because when I'm talking about making decisions, we're always looking at people not in isolation. And we're understanding that there's going to be the emotional pressure and stress. And like, especially like right now. So I've seen a difference even 6 months ago in our data or, a year ago when we were really understanding it. Just we started and we rolled out with that, just the user data versus, and then building into the advisors. The pressure and the stress around these financial decisions are going up. We're at war many places. There's so much stress. And so really understanding how is that stress impacting you just having a conversation like with your partner.
Right. And it makes it so much more of on the emotional side, which people are not really prepared to have, and advisors are not really equipped because they're not certified, or or they're not psychologists, they're not behavioral whatever. They're just like, you should fund your retirement plans and make sure you have insurance, like that's kind of how we were trained to like talk to people.
Right. Well, and I would say therapists and couples therapists, they're not just not trained in money. Like, how do you have the money conversation? They're literally told to avoid it. And in our data, so we're building essentially this incredibly powerful, I would argue, like one of the most powerful behavioral data sets, relational behavioral data sets. And within that, we have a really deep understanding and we're able to do a lot of segmentation. So therapists, for example, all pretty much we have these 9 clusters. We'll get into all of it, but they all sit in the same place. Financial people all sit in the same place in terms of behavior and decision-making and motivation. And so you're saying, yeah, advisors aren't really trained in your training to talk about the emotions. The people trained to talk about the emotions aren't trained to talk about the money. And so then there's like causing so much delay in both of these spaces, even if an individual or a couple or a family is really willing and are able to invest the time and the money into those conversations. Rarely is it really coming together.
Yeah. And so how did you and Nick come together to say like this could be a, a, a business in and of itself and not just a nice idea?
Yeah. Nick and I have known each other since we were in our early 20s. We were both in education, different backgrounds, but we lived in DC in the Obama years, which was awesome to live on Capitol Hill at that point in time. And I, so then we had a lot of life happened. And over the years, I moved into tech and product. I was at the Paired app in product. And so really it's a relational app for couples. And then Nick had reached out saying, hey, I'm working on this assessment. So like early forms. This is almost 2 years ago. And I really need you to look like, would you be open to really looking at it through an understanding of attachment and couples? Because he's looking at it, the individual and the relationship to money and values. And so then we move forward into really understanding and building from like, when this gets really powerful, when couples do it together. And then we started testing that.
Right.
And moving it into really understanding intimacy at scale is, well, it's interesting to have a mirror held up for you. But most of us, we're not just making decisions with a partner or someone else in your family or like all of us in their aging parents, because my goodness, it's so much work with aging parents
Yeah.
around money and stuff and fraud and all of these things, is the people who are working with us. And so then testing with clinical clients, and then started testing and rolling out, working with advisors and people managing money.
Yeah. And why did that, from a business perspective, why did that make sense as a distribution angle?
Contacts, I mean, founder led, because Nick has just an incredible community. Him and his husband in Philly are very involved with philanthropy and foundations in Philly. And so we've been able to move forward with, those relationships and building that trust, because early startups, like, it's all about, who you know and trust in so many ways. So that's really the big part of it.
Yeah. And expanding it from that network.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about this a lot also, just in the conversation I've been having here as the podcast or lives or whatever you want to call it,
Mhm.
and in-person events and one-on-ones. There's a lot of transitions going on in people's lives.
Yeah.
And you mentioned parents, aging, ourselves. We try to be in denial about it, but we're aging every day. If we have kids, they're getting older.
Mhm.
Life is a constant like transition,
Yeah.
and people are living and dying and marrying and divorcing and changing jobs, starting businesses, selling, failing, but it's always like the river keeps moving.
Right.
um so how do you help them, or how do you help the advisors to help them get grounded in sort of, and you mentioned values, so how do you sort of connect that to the values so that they can, no matter where they are in their own physical financial lives, how do you sort of keep them on track?
Yeah, let
That's
me
a big
walk
question, I know.
through. I know, it's like so many ways. Well, I think the answer is, it's a personal answer, and that's sort of the point of it, is what you might need and what I need in a moment of transition might look very different for different reasons. And the way, let me describe sort of what we've built, but ultimately is, yeah, like, we're constantly transitioning. The human condition is we like sameness. We like to know order. We like to know that this is going to feel safe to us. And then we have all of these things outside of our control. And most of us aren't living in the financial world. And all of us have to touch money. And all of us have to understand our lives through our relationship with time, because it's really not about money as in like investments or a savings account and all these things. Like, we think of it that way, but money decisions are our relationship with power. So our relationship with, this system that I'm in, and then our relationship with time. A money decision is, how am I choosing, I'm choosing to spend my time here with you. I'm choosing, do I want to be doing this and for a billable hour? Do I want to be doing this because this is an, joyful experience for me? I like connecting with people. I also appreciate one of my core strengths, which gets me in trouble sometimes, is I love exploring things. I love researching things. So, before we logged in, when you told me the things that you're into and interested in, immediately I was like, I just want to have a conversation that I can like pick your brain, delights me like that, because I understand my relationship to my well-being and my relationship to time is so meaningful for me, because there's going to be something that comes out of it that sparks it. And so all of that mixed together. And the reason why I know that about myself is because of our insights and a lot of therapy, of course, over the years, because therapists have to be in therapy. We literally required in grad school. So what we built is we have a 10 to 15 minute core assessment. The Calibrate core is able to place you, so it gives you and into the platform all like a lot of data points, but it places you into one of these 9 clusters. And the 9 clusters really, and we have an amazing data scientist, Serena, who is one of the most brilliant humans minds that I've ever possibly have worked with. And so what we're able to do is understand your relationship with like these 7 core ones, and then there's a lot underneath it, but understanding your traits. And so that's going to roll up into, how are you motivated? Are you internally motivated? Are you externally motivated? what is your, different types of thinking styles, your psychological capital. We're measuring your well-being. So the science of well-being. So we're really understanding your relationships, your positive emotions, your engagement. And I'm summarizing a lot of things because there's a lot of things, but we're also measuring, which I think is key, is your construal level. So are you an abstract thinker or a concrete thinker?
I don't know what that means. Yeah. Just like, so I think the problem with the finance, okay. One of the problems with the financial industry is the amount of jargon. And I feel like a lot of the jargon is used in order to keep the sort of like power. You talked about power, the power of the conversation, like with the insurance company, with the bank, the broker, whoever. So
and
that
therapists, we do the same thing. It's a problem. No, but I think that's exactly true. And then when you really get into it, so I've been very lucky to have sort of gotten into it, like, peeking under the hood for the last, over a year at this point. And in that, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not actually that complicated. And like therapy and clinical stuff, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's really not that complicated. But language is complicated because we have so many different definitions of it. So I mean, to sort of summarize it up, is we understand your relationship, the way you're thinking, the way you're making decisions. It goes into these 9 clusters. And then the key thing is we've then built this methodology around that. And to answer your question from earlier, it's like, so what do advisors do with it and how does it actually help? The methodology around that is able to understand you as the advisor, who you're working with. An easy way to think about it is your gut might tell you, if the person doesn't, they're delaying on their paperwork. That's an easy one because who doesn't struggle with that one, right? My clients are delaying on their paperwork. We're going to tell you actually why. We're going to tell you how to get that paperwork faster, what kind of intervention, and then you're actually just seeing the action. And so what's like for you in your position, like what's the biggest challenge? And I'll give you sort of the example of like how it applies in that you have with clients.
Internally or externally, I think it's sort of sometimes.
Either one.
Yeah, sometimes it's just the following up and the all that kind of stuff. But then at the same time, it's people not feeling the same urgency that I, as let's say the financial professional, if I'm putting that hat on, so it's like I want things to get done and they're not, or if it's spouses or business partners, it's like maybe they're not aligned. One is kind of taking the lead or one is holding back, and that creates a little bit of, I don't want to say conflict, but a challenge.
Yeah. So I can sort of essentially do our entire system in my head and the segmentation. Give me an example of the roles. So like, do you work with other people in finance? Are you working with lawyers? Are you working with more doctors? Like if you had a couple, what would be like they're two different, like,
Yeah, generally two white collar, could be doctors, or, one-on-one doctor attorney could be a classic, or even a business owner, entrepreneur, and someone who works within tech. So obviously those are very different types of individuals, and so
yes and no in our data.
yeah.
So they are, but let's just talk about the frustration for most advisors is I'm not getting them to move into action in some way. We can put that frustration at a different point, whether it's early on in that sort of earlier sales, I'm just trying to get them to be a client and get all of that initial paperwork done. And actually, early on, can we actually get like a little bit more assets under management than they had with that past person, something like that. Or honestly, much later in the relationship too. That's a big one that advisors use it. It's like, we're managing this much, but if we could get more over here kind of deal. So if you had a doctor, surgeon, very specialized in their field, right? So this is potentially kind of an ideal client for many advisors. Like that's who they're looking for as clients. And that specialty that it takes to be so focused to be a doctor or surgeon means you are okay with being really deep into research. It means that your strengths, so in our data, is you'll see strengths around research. So, like, that's one of my strengths, but I'm a fast mover for other reasons.
Okay.
And in that, they actually are kind of like this, like, ideal on paper client drives advisors nuts because they're asking questions, but they're not really that hurried. They're thoughtful, and that meeting seems to go really well, right? The lovely human beings.
Mhm.
But they're not really moving into action. But it doesn't really make sense because on paper, this plan makes
Yeah.
a lot of sense. Right. But then you have a
Yeah.
partner who might be like, let's say the partner is, I have one that I work with. So let's say the partner is a therapist. So a different cluster. Therapists equally are moving slower. But one of the reasons they might be moving slower is they're so afraid of making a mistake. So
Mhm.
here's a couple that is potentially moving slow for two very different reasons. The surgeon in their specialty, a part of what makes them go into that work, that very grueling, all of that education, is because they carry the weight of the world on their shoulders. They became that surgeon because maybe somewhere in the story, for them was like they lost someone so important. So that same heaviness is what brought them into the field. And so the recommendation within our system is going to be potentially something closer to, I need to help you feel like you're not carrying everything to move you into action. So when you're asking me
Mhm.
questions, I actually need to be like, hey, this is, I think we have enough information. I'm thinking that you're really just worried about, is this the right decision? Like, is this trust the right thing to set up for your kids? You know what?
Mhm.
Like, in that worry, like, what if we actually walk them through it before we sign the paperwork? And it's going to action, but they're not suggesting that because they're carrying so much the belief. So we have something around help aversion. We have actual numbers to really understand how open and willing are you to accept help or ask for help. And so when the advisor is seeing, oh, we got a high help aversion score, we're seeing these recommendations, knowing they're not going to reach out for help, meaning so you're going to make recommendations and maybe they have a really low relationship score, but they're
Mhm.
an incredibly sweet human. And so we're really tuning those recommendations in where, so like an advisor working with me is, if I'm not actioning on something, sadly, it's because I've overextended myself. I'm way too busy. And the big
Mhm.
mistake the advisor made was making recommendations that we couldn't automate.
Mhm.
But because I'm a therapist, they want to talk to me about it. They think it's values aligned, blah, blah, blah. No, I'm not going to say yes to something that's not values aligned for me. That's not the
Mhm.
problem, is you made recommendations that we can't immediately create a system that is automated because I'm so busy.
Yeah.
That's what's happening. And the misread on that is so heavy in terms of
Yeah.
like, because of the other end, it's just, I'm not getting an email back. I don't know why. So we're able to just
Right.
tell, oh, we had an advisor email this morning. Joe at Green Investments, who has a podcast also, I love Joe. He works very heavily with clients who he meets at like green related activism, so environmental activism. So these are clients that I would say
Oh,
traditional.
so it's on the nose.
Yeah.
Green.
Oh
Okay.
my gosh. It's so on the nose.
Not very subtle.
Exactly. But for him, so he's, working with people who I would say overall probably are pretty skeptical of the financial world and investing, but they're at a place in their life that everyone should be investing and early, but, really should be investing. And his
Yeah.
email this morning was, hey, just here, we're just doing a check-in update. So he just checked in and was like, for this client, it said values driven. And so I doubled down in X, Y, and Z for that client. And for this client, it was really around pacing. And so making sure, and I think that's right, I should pull up the email, but really making
Okay.
sure that I'm pacing with them and I need to slow down. I could pressure them too much. Very
Mhm.
different recommendations. This is I don't know off the top of my head, but
Yeah.
first, second time meeting them, how would you ever know that?
It's
Right.
so funny because not to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
I'm thinking about like back in the day training, and I'm older than I look, but it was like, here's how you get referrals. You you tell them you need referrals. You put down like 1 through 10 on a piece of paper, and you put it in their face, and you shut up. And it's like, that's gonna work. Like, what is that gonna really achieve?
Yeah.
And
What
it's
does
like,
that do?
it just makes the the whole thing very awkward.
Hmm.
Maybe someone squeezes out a name, but it doesn't mean anything. It's not actually helpful. But that was sort of and that was not that long ago. Um, you know, obviously, LinkedIn and the internet in general, and
Yeah.
all these community things that are popping up has definitely changed the vibe. But that's something that just popped in my brain as like, oh, I remember that very well, and that was like early days.
Right. Yeah. And like, what do you do with that next? Right. Like,
You're not building a relationship, that's for sure. You're transactional, and so I think
exactly.
there's a big flip in the industry from, maybe this is real, and maybe it's just in my brain, or maybe it's a hope that it's going more relationship driven, really deep, and I think that's obviously very important when it comes to the overall sort of macro environment of great wealth transfer, all
Yep.
this money in motion. How do you set things up for yourself, for your dependents, or if you have, I mean, I've gotten clients in the past just by asking some questions about, do you have special needs people in your family, or
Hmm.
something of
Yeah.
that nature, where it's
We
like,
ask if you're neurodivergent too. I mean, it really speaks to advisors who are neurodivergent, which has been lovely having advisors being like, oh, yeah, I am. But yeah, people who sort of don't have maybe a sort of traditional relationship to money and, not just because it wasn't modeled for you, like you might have grown up in a system that it actually was, but, for different
yeah,
reasons, you know, I would say.
yeah,
So the interesting thing, as you're talking about this is how you were taught to like just write numbers down is so what we've found with financial advisors, and we've had hundreds of them do it. So for onboarding for us, everyone takes the assessment. So all advisors, clinical people, the executive team that we're working with. Coincidentally, the next email that I always get is like, hey, can my partner, often wives, right? Because very male dominated industry, like, can my wife take it? We have a really different relationship to money. I was like, of course. And so
yeah.
that's sort of like the accidental next step. But because of that, we within our data really understand where advisors sit. So we have these 9 clusters, and most kind of traditional people in banking sit in 2 of them and heavily in one of them, just as like therapists heavily sit in one. And it's cluster 5. And so if you go to like homeecpodcast.com, you'll see like some breakdowns of our clusters. But the key thing about cluster 5s is they are really capable, and you might be one, so I might be speaking to you. You have to go look it up. But they're really capable, but they're also have pretty low motivation to get uncomfortable. So if you
Mm,
have a financial system that's been set up this way, that this and we think of like we often talk about this through like regulation, and that's why it's fintech, right? Like everyone hates selling into fintech, but also is like it moves really slow, these slow scale cycles and all this stuff. It's like, but you're also talking about all these cluster 5s. A lot of fintech founders, I'm not one, but a lot of fintech founders are cluster 5s too. And the reason why in that core is like they're incredible stable people. I want a really stable person managing my money. Makes complete sense to me. There's nothing wrong with that. Like every single cluster we all have strengths and weaknesses, right? In that stability and comfort, because their systems are not dysregulating, they also
yeah.
have really low motivation to move. They have high motivation. It's not like a lack of motivation, but
Mhm.
I really need to see the value in why I'm going to do anything different. And so the financial
Yeah,
industry stays the same,
yeah,
and they want to be a hero. And so I'm so sorry to any cluster 5s who are going to see this, because a lot of financial people are. This is also why a lot of the ways that are set up with the workflow and what's standard and what's training is written by cluster 5s about cluster 5
right,
saying, I want to be a hero.
right. Because you
Yeah.
want to make a difference, and it's Do you know who George Jordan is?
Yeah. Tell
So
me.
he wrote a book. He was a MetLife guy, and he wrote a book called "Living a Life of Significance." So that's definitely in people's minds of why they want. And like his story is a very classic. Um, his father passed away when he was very young. There was some life insurance, but like it
Mhm.
still created this whole um, it created a lot of feelings towards and around money, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, how can it not? And
Yeah.
that
Trauma.
impacts the rest of your life,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
I saw Nirayal. I don't know if you know who he is. He
Mm.
gave a talk on like beliefs. He wrote a book. He's written a few books, and one of his main points is the human brain processes so much information all day long, but we only retain like point whatever percent,
Yep.
and our whole attitude is driven towards being comfortable and not being in and avoiding pain. So
100%. I mean, it's a survival. So, like, that is what we're trained to do. And if we think about our relationship with time and money is forming by the age of 10 or 11, before we're
mm,
ever actually engaging with it for most of us in a serious way or of any concept of it. And so developmentally, those early attachment is how do I get attention? So that not because I'm attention seeking, but because like my diaper's wet, I'm hungry, I'm cold, right? Like so like that's what's sitting underneath this. And then now we're translating that into our work lives and into our partnerships and into how we're parenting. And so, even when we're talking about like, the great wealth transfer, so it's like buzzy to talk about it. What are we really talking about? We're talking about families, that aging parent feeling either responsibility or stress or disappointment in their kids, right? And their view and their judgment into who can manage what and who's the right person. How do I hand this off? There's so much fear that shows up in those conversations. Like, my goodness. And sadly, a lot of gendered stuff is, I'm noticing, really working with these family offices and things like really showing up in
mhm,
these conversations. Um, and then that's all just about attachment. But the person sitting there when those conversations actually happen is just talking about money and it's just, or who, beneficiaries money.
right. So
Yeah.
can you drill down into that? Like how is that fear showing up, and how is that
Yeah.
actually impacting the decisions?
Yeah. So let's just take we're building something that is essentially giving everyone a family office level of being held and navigate through. Like, just, it's so challenging to think about the complexities of insurance and risk. And so in that is we have a family. And so we might have like a business owner that is retiring and trying to set up all these things or working towards selling the business. And then you have adult kids, and maybe one of them, like, this is a scenario that's like, I feel like we're walking through constantly. One of the
Yeah,
adult kids,
it's even been on TV.
yeah, a couple of
You
times,
might have
right?
seen it.
Maybe a few times, right? But like one of the adult kids is buying the business, and you have the other ones, and then you have that dynamic, and then you have the partner that probably like has never met with your advisor before. So we talk about just like the psychology and the attachment of what's going on is now if we understand this person through our insights is that business owner probably has pretty good internal or internal extra motivation, but probably pretty high motivation because they built the business, they built the wealth. Even maybe they're maintaining it, they might have gotten a million from somebody, but they're maintaining the wealth somehow. So they're motivated to do that.
Mhm.
But then that next gen, one of the most interesting things is if it's been very lucrative, didn't have to have that motivation to have stability. And they've been trying to seek attention from a parent who was getting rewards through money and business probably, or
Mhm.
they were closer maybe to the sort of the non-main money winning parent potentially too. And
Sure.
so so that parent is viewing an attention seeking child in relationship to what they get attention, and then potentially seeing that child as failing, even if the numbers are fine, because they're not modeling, they're not thinking about how they're going to succeed in life in the same way because they wouldn't, because they grew up in a very different environment than that, maybe immigrant parent who had nothing
Right.
and was like, I had to do everything until my fingers were bleeding. And that dynamic, when the advisor is
Yeah.
holding it, is we're really able to see, well, to help the parent really put the right person in place or set this up the right way, is they're actually really concrete thinkers. And so, if you're working with if you're an advisor working with someone who's really struggling to do the transition, is helping them see, and they're a concrete thinker, helping them see the they're only seeing like the actions in the immediate and not the everyday. And so one of the conversations in all of that that's really coming up a lot is around mental capacity going down, dementia, because we're seeing so much more of that. And if that person's not an abstract thinker, they're not really thinking into the future. Like they built a solid business, but they're not like a strategist. Like I'm a strategist. I'm an extreme abstract thinker. Like I parent from like imagining my kids at 45 all the time. It's so annoying where I'm like thinking about their attachment and I'm just like, oh my gosh, but when they're married, I want to make sure that like my son says this to his future partner. Like, what? Like, why? That's ridiculous. Right. But a concrete thinker, I've worked with so many business owners, and I mean, probably you too, who are so good at actioning things. Like you talk about it in the meeting, then they action on it. And like, I'm like, you already set up X, Y, and Z. It's so amazing. And they look like powerhouses. And then you get into we do their like family risk. And nobody even has passwords to things, like basic things, right? Like they've set up all the same things in 12 different banks. Like, bro, if you die tomorrow, do you know how hard this is going to be? So it's really looking at that risk that you're trying to assess as early as possible with how are you making decisions with the person working with you? How do they make interventions? So if you're a concrete thinker, but you're values driven, is we now are talking about, let's just take a moment. I know it's hard for you to, maybe you wouldn't say it like that, but it's what you're saying. It's hard for you to potentially imagine this 20 years down the road. I'm going to just sketch it out for you based on what's not happening right now. And when they're like, I'd never thought about that, or you have someone who's a strategic thinker like me, delaying currently still on, life insurance policy update. But I'm married to a very concrete thinker, so professional athletes, when we're working with like, especially with all this NIL money and things like that. So even at a young age, really concrete thinkers, they're really good at sports.
Right. So there's a Hebrew word. That's a good one. It's tachlis. So
Tachlis.
I'll give you the whole thing later, but basically it just means like to the point, getting things done. Like what do we have to do today? And like so what you're saying is a lot of people don't sort of sit in that position when they're a little.
Yeah, and we can really say exactly who, just knowing that this person's going to struggle getting the immediate thing done.
Yeah.
Here's the intervention.
So let me ask you, so are there there must be then other use cases for this type of tool and technology, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's
so
any consumer.
Yeah, you name it. So we've tested, so it's thinking about, early tech, go to market. This is what we're doing. We have clinical people, couples therapists love it, testing it and using it with their clients. I mean, if you can understand where the clash is happening in session 1 or 2, and then we think about it is you're going to put it into, I like to think of it like the hub and spoke model. So you have the client or the family, so like your family office at the center, and then every single expertise around you. What Calibrate does, it's this connective tissue that can calibrate every touch point. So many people are, calibrating their newsletters. Once you know the cluster, or we can back into the clusters, you're personalizing every email. You're using every level of how do you want to reach a person, where are they stuck. Workshops, advisors who like to do workshops are like, oh, I can have 10, 15 people in this workshop take the assessment in advance. And now we're personalizing what's the workshop about, to how do these people think, act, feel, and how do I reach them? But yeah, so it goes into clinical, and then we're exploring some other, areas in that. So, yeah.
Yeah. And you just said like one of the other buzzwords in the industry, which is personalization. So what does that look like? And also then I would imagine scaling personalization is a big challenge.
Yeah. So if you take the insights, you name it, you can personalize it. So for example, what we're building in terms of consumer facing is if we have your family risk assessed and we have your Calibrate core assess, that next step. So anyone coming in, it might be you need to get some insurance stuff done.
Mm-hmm.
We're understanding you at the nervous system level. And so for many people, that's going to look like we need to bring you through an experience to get that done. Or what we're really doing is the right solution at the right time in the right way. It might be they're completely capable. There's different reasons why it hasn't gotten done. Just connect them directly to the right person to work with them. We don't need to sort of bring your system through and actually do it. And so it's that level of tailoring is what we're able to do and really understand through these insights.
Yeah, and then sometimes it's almost like, a lot of the good outcomes come because the right person is working with the right
Mm-hmm.
other person.
Yep.
It doesn't even have to be in the financial space. It could be anything. That could be real estate acquisition, buying your own home. If you don't mix
Yeah.
well with somebody, sometimes it's nothing personal. It's just not a good fit. So
Well, in the clinical space, we call it attunement, and it's heavily researched.
everything is so jargony, and that's in
I
your
know,
space. I gotta tell
but
you.
it's essentially that's
Attunement. Come on,
exactly what we're
that's not
doing.
a real word.
It's a real world. It's real. Yep, attunement. There's a lot of research on it. I know. I'm like, when people talk about it in other spaces, I'm like, this is a whole body of research of how we're relating to each other. Yeah, and that is exactly
But that's also a challenge
yeah.
because it's so non-universal that it's like
It's
then you have to
so,
like explain it. Like,
but this is sort of the point is like that's what we've built is like
Mhm.
if let's just say you are a cluster 5, I'm a cluster 6. We could say, both of us seem, pretty outgoing and relational. Like we're probably getting along fine. Does that change if one of us was in a position of power? Like if I was your couples therapist and you were my, financial broker in some way, all of these things. But ultimately, the quality of that person, we really like to give credit to all these different qualities, but really it's like half the time it's like people are just misreading the situation. We've gotten it a ton asking about advisor matching. And this is sort of the constant question. And I'm like, that's cool. That's a possibility. We have it in our data. We're able to really understand, this person works better with this and this for natural reasons in terms of, pacing and things like that. But ultimately, don't we want to make all of us better versions of ourselves and help us grow? So for me, when people get in there, I'm like, it's so much less around that advisor matching, which there is a lot to that. But there's so much around helping someone who's either less experienced or just your middle of the road expert in something who isn't, 20 years into their career leveling up. And that's really like what it's all about because you don't have to have had all of this life experience and skill to understand how to read a person. We're saying this person needs this to be able to feel seen and heard and understood and move into action.
Right. And then I think it also could go into the team building within the financial services firm itself. Like if your husband was a linebacker, well, he's not going to play offensive tackle. You know what I mean? So positions matter and abilities matter and speed and skill and whatever in one thing, or knowledge and interest and just personality and dealing with clients and their
Absolutely.
money.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of my favorite things, because I'm a consultant as well, is when we're working with a business, we're doing this. It's nice that everything's scalable versus like having a consultant come in and just like do this activity with us. Okay, cool. How did we apply? People will be like, I learned I was a bird in something. Like, how does that actually apply into my life? We're able to actually sit there with your team. For some of the companies we're working with, we've now seen the kinds of clients they work with in the way through our system be like, oh, a lot of firms, whether it's because of their marketing, it's because of who they are. We work with a lot of values driven firms. They're seeing 2 to 3 different clusters in our 9. So we're able to really do the business strategy and then them as a team working together. And then we're talking about their own delays and blocks. It's been a blast. I love it.
Yeah.
But it's exactly what you're thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, and people do become magnets, so or they work with people in similar either a niche or a bubble, whatever you want to call it. Like if you're
Yeah.
from a Orthodox Jewish background in Brooklyn, like who are you probably most likely to really work with?
Also,
You
like,
know,
how are you building these businesses? Just like therapy, it's through referrals. And so, if
Mhm.
one person in this world, you help them in this way, now they're going to be sending all of their friends who they think could be helped in a similar way. Even if, does it match your advertising or not? And then you're building a really strong business around a similar core problem. Was that the core problem you cared about? Or was it you got a really strong, heavy talker sort of referral client that built your business?
Mhm. Right. Yeah, it could be any, and it could be a combination of factors too. Um, I feel like we could talk for forever, but we do have to kind of
Yeah.
start wrapping up a little bit. So how can, first of all, if we take a step back and look at the financial services industry as a whole, and I posted about the just total, not total, but relative lack of women in the
Yeah.
space, how can that um, solve some of the issues if the industry actually said or someone said, well, we have to actually really uh, turn make this a credible option for women to join front facing client facing situations.
Yeah.
Is it to make it more therapy-ish?
Well, I mean, and then you have, because we do have a distribution with like financial therapy associations. We have financial therapists using the tool, which has been amazing. I would say it's less around making it more therapy-ish, but being in the inside in this like interesting way that I am. And we work with, I've been very lucky. And I'm like, we actually work with a lot of women, even though we know that's rare because they are seeking out tools because they are, relational roles. Um, is to have companies really think about their company culture, of course, right? Cliche, everyone knows that.
Mhm.
But are the natural strengths maybe of how women are being socialized really being valued in the work and in the industry? And I would say it's, maybe some of those softer skills. I mean, it sounds so gendered, but we're talking about gender things, is where the industry is moving anyway. And so the fact that there's not a lot of women in those rooms talking about, hey, how do we talk about, with this couple around aging, around like, how do we have these conversations? And it's a
Mhm.
bunch of men in a room who aren't
Right.
that secondary, primary parent who's now having to take over finances and dealing with the kids things and motivated from very different spaces. Um,
Mhm.
I think that's a problem. Like, you have to think about who's in the room. And in terms of our data is we actually are able to I sit there with a bunch of executives and say, there's no diversity in this room. Not just because like if I'm the blackest person in the room, it's a problem. Like that's a problem. Like we know it's a really white room, but it will be often like maybe there's one female in the room. But I now,
Right.
from a data-driven way, am able to say, like, look at what that means in your content. We will walk in and we will pull and be like, let me tell you how all of this is written for one of the 8 clusters,
Yeah.
and let me tell you why. And like
Yeah.
that's a big thing is like we're wanting more women in the industry, but how are they actually creating spaces where like their strengths are valued versus them having to chameleon and just be like a male version of themselves?
Right. And it's yeah, and it reminds me of a story. I have a friend who she's, like an executive director of some organization that deals with actually doctors. And this is a while ago. She was the only woman in the room and someone asked her for like coffee or something. And it's like, first of all, that
All the
that
time.
sets the tone also for the whole rest of the day, and the relationship between them forever.
Yeah. Well, and it's probably, ultimately we all need better tools to hold up good mirrors, like including financial ones, right? We all need to look at our finances and engage with it. If we think like psychologically speaking in terms of safety, like we need space to play. We need space to test things out and learn and not feel like there's so much riding on it. We have to divorce ourselves from being so attached to the outcomes of every decision so that we can just do some of the things and the outcome isn't such a big deal, but financial decisions feel like a big deal all the time.
Right. Right. You feel like you always have to get it right because the cost of getting it wrong is very high.
But the cost of not doing anything is so much higher than getting it wrong. Like
Sure.
most of the time, right? Like getting it wrong is still a better percentage point than not doing it. And
Oh yeah,
in that,
you want to stack things in the odds of good outcomes, and action is better than non-action for sure.
right. But that's not how our systems work. Our systems are saying, I can tell you a bunch of times I did something and it was incredibly painful and scary, and I don't want to repeat that. And I'm going to do everything I can to not repeat that. And the brain doesn't sort of logically say, but like, this isn't the scary thing. Like, you know what I mean? Like, clicking send on this little insurance policy isn't the scary thing. You've never done this before, but it's
Mm,
unknown. And so actually, it feels like the big scary thing.
right. Amazing. So
Yeah.
first of all, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. How can people support what you're working on, or just even take in a couple of the ideas that we've spoken about?
Absolutely. Yeah, so Calibrate intelligence.com. You can take the assessment, but also we have a podcast. We have an episode that came out today that was around calibrating, but your like home ecosystem and regulation with a guest therapist. And that's our podcast is Home Ec. So it's homeecpodcast.com.
Okay.
Yes, I can list out all of the social things, but
Yeah.
my New
Well,
York
please
practice.
just
Yeah.
put them in the comments
Yeah.
or
I'll
wherever.
I'll click it all out. But ultimately, like right here on LinkedIn is where we all live. Let's be real about it. But
Right.
this was
Especially if it's
great. Do you have a takeaway of something that you're like thinking about because you're so living in this world that feels like it's sparking for you?
um, I mean, it's a kind of a cop out to say all of it, but but it's like when I am doing these, like I'm in my brain is in two worlds because it's like I'm trying to just focus on like the conversation, but also like I'm taking some notes on like, okay, I'm gonna clip minute 38,
Yeah.
like
You're like, actually, that was awkward. So yeah.
yeah, no. I think there's a lot that maybe it's another cop out. Well, there's a lot of takeaways. Everything's a takeaway.
It's too much pressure, that's all.
It's a lot of pressure. You put me on the spot.
Yeah.
I wasn't really ready. No,
That's
but
fine.
um, yeah, I just think how we organize our thoughts and how we have to understand ourselves with the you guys termed it the clusters, you know. I actually it came into my brain also. Does that does that correlate with like the astrological signs and like because people do give
We should like line it
credence
up
to.
with birthdays and be like, "Oh my goodness, I'm a Libra.
I'm a
Every
Leo.
Libra, you're ooh, well, that makes sense. My son's a Leo. I can see this.
Okay.
Rocking it."
What's your sign? No, that if that was the first question you ask as a financial advisor when you enter someone's, $2 million home, wouldn't that be I would like to see that happen, actually.
I mean, honestly, like for some, right? Some of our data would be like, this is the client that you would ask that. And this one you better not because they will
Right.
walk you out
They're
of your
not gonna
home.
that's not their cup of tea. No, that's good.
Yeah.
I always ask this, who's maybe someone you would want to have this type of conversation with, from the past, from now, from
Honestly, I've been thinking a lot about my grandfather, who's passed, who raised me, Pete Seeger. And the reason why
wait a second.
is
Wait a second. Time out. The Pete Seeger?
yeah, pop that middle name. Yeah, I was
How
Beacon,
did
New
we,
York.
how did we
Yeah.
go for 54 minutes? This is like,
Um, yeah, I
yeah.
work on that in therapy for a very long time, but it's my
Okay.
honest answer to the
Wow.
question. Is
Yeah. No,
you know,
that might be the best one I've ever heard.
oh good. Yeah, I was thinking about it and I would say, so my grandfather raised me to care about the world. So like you walk around, you pick up trash. You don't like, my kids do
Mm,
not walk by trash in the street. My son like brings a plastic bag in his backpack and like picks up trash in the yard at school. And the teacher's always like, it's so weird. I'm like, yes, he has autism, but also it's a value of our family. Is it okay? They're like, yeah, he got everyone to pick up trash today. I'm like, I love it. This is great. Um, and so for me, the conversation I would have with my grandfather is, you have tried so hard to get people to care about activism and the environment and to just like care, right? And so I
mm,
think I've done a lot of activism work over the years, and because I was raised in it, this is just like normal life for me.
mm,
And the song like One Grain of Sand. And so we like come back to, each of us does our part, like, one grain of sand, right? Or, pick another activism song, all of them. And the conversation I would have with him is, tell me about the actual impact you wanted, because my grandfather gave away all of his money as much as
mm,
humanly possible at all times, did not invest, couldn't look at his tax returns, would close his eyes. I started helping them write checks and pay bills when I was about 7 and working on finances really young. So when I tell you I'm building a family office for people, I'm building it for like an 8-year-old me who was like, somebody come along and please help. This is crazy. And places like, BNY, when I sit there with them and talk to them now as an adult, I'm like, you guys couldn't convince my grandfather, who cared so much about the world,
mm.
to set up systems of investing so that these nonprofits that he built could continue to be funded. I would have a conversation with him because now I have a system that I
Mm,
feel without a doubt could have gotten, not just, the generational wealth is one thing. It's really not about me and my family. Like, we can work. I work all the time. It's around the fact that he set up so many systems that have ridiculous founder's disease, but also like could be fully funded and kept growing after he passed. And he didn't, because he didn't believe in investing, because all it was to him was this really scary thing. And so I would
wow.
now test our system. I've tested it on everyone in my family, of course, and it works. My brother's got into things. I mean, it's amazing. Like, the success stories of this, what we built, is like just ridiculous. But I would be like, I think I could have done it. I think I could have made it so he could have, I mean,
Yeah,
he brought in the wealth and he just gave it away as much as possible.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's really like an amazing way to. I have so many more questions now, but um, like, what about just royalties now and into the future? Is that just
People's presumption of what it looks like is not what it
mm,
looks like for so many reasons. And like that conversation, like to understand the why behind our work, and to understand like the sandwich generation, and like there's so much neurodivergence in my family, but then you have a lot, it's heavy. Like, you have generational things, but it wasn't set up right. And
mhm,
then you have like his manager's family, everything set up. It was like amazing. I'm so happy for them. There's no resentment, no anger,
mhm,
but growing up in it, to know the right
yeah,
people, the right banks, everything was there and couldn't reach him, is like, there's a hunger in me, because I grow up around so many people and families, some of them very
yeah,
famous, some of them not, that like I see the difference when it gets lost. And the
oh, wow,
resources, the resource and the sacrifices people have to make, and the things you have to give away or
yeah,
sell, that just didn't have to be that way at
right.
all. And then
That's
you layer on a ton of other stuff, and so that's what, and I do a lot of
well,
work and
yeah,
research in economic mobility and activism, but it just doesn't have to be this way. So we're
wow,
building something different to like really disrupt a system that
yeah,
could create so much more stability for families.
yeah. I think that's like the perfect place to leave it, and
Oh, good, because I
that's a
got a
real
meeting.
legacy. Well, that too, and it's been an hour, and I could still go more, but um,
Yeah,
that's
that's a
amazing.
legacy.
That's a legacy play.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And changing people's financial lives. You change a life, you change the world. So
And you can go do good things with it. Like, that's the whole thing. You can go do and have capacity and energy to go do the things. And right now we need a lot of energy, because we all need to go be doing the things.
okay, go do your thing. We will talk
So
soon.
good.
You know, all good things. Take care. Thank you so much.
Bye. Be safe.
Talk soon. All right, bye bye.